immunity, all of that. They don't care about that. I think that Jesse's conscience is probably not letting him sleep right now, so I think he should unload that conscience and just come out and tell the American people what actually happened.
So that was last night. This is this morning. Matt Finn's live outside police headquarters there in Chicago. Let's begin there. Matt, good morning.
Bill, good morning. Chicago police tell us that Jussie Smollett arranged to turn himself in away from the cameras at 5 o'clock this morning with the presence of his attorneys. It happened without incident, and Jussie Smollett's mugshot is scheduled to be released after the press conference at 9 a.m. local time this morning. Right now, Jussie Smollett is being represented by at least 3 attorneys, including high-profile criminal defense attorney Mark Garagos. Smollett initially was cooperating with police as they investigated his report that he was beat by President Trump supporters who he claims called him racial and homophobic slurs. But then the 2 brothers associated with this alleged hoax were interrogated by police, and the investigation dramatically shifted. At that point, Smollett stopped talking to police. It is our understanding that Smollett never responded to Chicago police's request for a follow-up interview that they made last Saturday. So police took their case to a grand jury where they got the felony charge approved and the ability to arrest Smollett. Smollett's attorney released a statement writing, quote, "Like any other citizen, Mr. Smollett enjoys the presumption of innocence, particularly when there has been an investigation like this one where information, both true and false, has been repeatedly leaked. Given these circumstances, we intend to conduct a thorough investigation and to mount an aggressive defense." New video also shows the Osundaro brothers apparently buying supplies, including ski masks, gloves, and hats. The Osundaro brothers also testified for 2.5 hours before a grand jury yesterday. Their attorney says the brothers did get some type of payment from Smollett, but not according to the narrative the public might think. The brothers' attorney praises police's meticulous investigation and says the truth will be revealed.
When I say that the police spent countless man-hours trying to piece this together, I mean that. I absolutely mean that. When I say that my clients spent countless hours getting their story out there to the police so that they could do their work, I mean that too.
That woman, the attorney for the brothers, says she does not expect police to charge the 2 men associated with this alleged hoax. Bill, Sandra.
What about the federal level, Matt? Could he also be in trouble with federal investigators here today?
Yes, he could. The FBI is investigating an alleged death threat letter that Smollett received a week before this alleged hoax. And if the FBI determines he is the one who sent that threat through the mail and or lied to them, he is facing federal charges. And, you know, here at police headquarters, I can't tell you that there are police officers and detectives who are clearly upset by this entire thing. From the beginning, I was talking to Chicago police sources and people within the city of Chicago who did not want to doubt Jussie Smollett, but felt that they were being duped by this claim and that precious resources were being wasted here in this city that currently annually has a murder rate that's higher than New York and L.A. combined. So if it is determined that Jussie Smollett is found guilty of this alleged hoax, he could pay some or be required to pay some pretty serious restitution to this city. Sandra,
right,
Bill.
Appreciate that. 1 hour from now, Chicago Police, 10 o'clock Eastern, 9 o'clock there in Chicago, Matt Finn, Police Headquarters. Thank you, sir. 4 past the hour.
Thanks to Matt there. Well, the Trump administration telling ISIS bride Hoda Muthana she cannot come home again. The president and secretary of state saying the woman and her 18-month-old son will not be allowed back into the country because she is not an American citizen, claiming her family and lawyer dispute. Kevin Cork is live at the White House this morning. Kevin, what is the White House saying about her U.S. citizenship?
Yeah, a great question. She was actually born in New Jersey, but as you well know, Sandra, there are a number of ways you can actually forfeit your citizenship. In fact, let me take you to Twitter and share just a bit of what the president had to say about this story. It's been one that has been in the news a great deal. You saw the particular person, Hoda Muthana, all over the media saying she wants to come back home. Here's what the president said. He said, "I have instructed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and he fully agrees, not to allow Hoda Muthana to come back into the country. She was born in New Jersey. She was actually living in the state of Alabama, at which point she had a turn in her life and she began to support ISIS. In fact, she had a number of posts on social media where she was calling for death and destruction here in the U.S. Here's what Mike Pompeo had to say about her this morning.
I don't get the heartstrings deal. This is a woman who inflicted enormous risk on American soldiers, on American citizens. She's a terrorist. She's not coming back. President Trump made clear that she wasn't coming back. She's not a U.S. citizen. She is not entitled to U.S. citizenship, and she's not coming back to our country to pose a threat.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, by the way, her attorney, Sandra, this morning, actually yesterday, I should point out, on Twitter, showed her birth certificate and paperwork that seemed to document the fact that her father was no longer in the diplomatic corps, and thus she was an American citizen when she was born here. But as you also know, there are a number of U.S. statutes that could cause you to lose your citizenship, especially if you go abroad to fight with a foreign enemy.
We will find out a lot more from the attorney representing her in just a bit. Meanwhile, Kevin, what are we hearing about the latest timeline on the possible release of the long-awaited Mueller report?
Have you and I been waiting long enough for this thing? I mean, it's not just you, it's not just me, it's not just the American people. The entire world has been hearing about this for a great deal of time. We're actually hearing more and more reports now that that report could be in the hands of the Attorney General, Bill Barr, as soon as the end of this week, according to one report that we actually saw this morning. Others suggest it'll happen next week. Of course, the president is leaving the country. We'll have to see what the timing is like. Speaking of, here's what the president had to say when he was asked yesterday if he thought the report should be made public.
That'll be totally up to the new Attorney General. He's a tremendous man, a tremendous person who really respects this country and respects the Justice Department. So that'll be totally up to him. The new Attorney General, yes. That'll, I guess, from what I understand, that will be totally up to the Attorney General.
The Attorney General, Bill Barr, who was previously an Attorney General, he is back. He could have the report in his hands, and he has said publicly he'd like to get out as much as possible, although he has the final say about what from that report will be made public. We've waited long enough. Hopefully we'll end up with it in our hands soon enough, Sandra. We'll see.
Soon enough. Thank you. Kevin Corke at the White House.
Meanwhile, we got the 2020 hopefuls already grappling with socialism. Now they're trying to figure out how far is too far left. Karl Rove writes in the Wall Street Journal today. Under the headline, "Every Billionaire is a Policy Mistake." Karl Rove's live with me from Austin, Texas. Sir, good day to you. I'm going to read the first line in your piece today, okay? Here it is on screen. "Once upon a time," you write, "Democrats worked to reduce income inequality by raising up those on the bottom of the economic ladder with the government's help. Even efforts to tax the rich at higher rates to fund these programs were tempered by a desire not to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. That view has been replaced by a deep hostility to wealth." Your words, explain, sir.
Well, I was taken by the Twitter handle of one of the top aides to Representative Ocasio-Cortez. "Every billionaire is a policy failure." And I've also been taken by the language of other Democrats who've been following her. Representative Ocasio-Cortez. She herself said any system that allows billionaires while people have ringworm in Alabama is wrong. And Elizabeth Warren, billionaires are freeloaders. Senator Sanders now entered into the presidential contest. Billionaires are insatiable greed, and they're destroying the fabric of our country. Well, you know, last time I looked, Bill Gates did us a great favor by inventing the Microsoft operating system that popularized the personal computer. Steve Jobs did us a great thing by helping attract more people to personal computers and then inventing the iPad and the iPod and the smartphone with the iPhone. I mean, these people made money because the value of their companies grew. They didn't take big salaries. In some instances, they paid themselves $1 a year. But their wealth came from building a company that serves the vital interests of American consumers and helps make our lives better and easier. The richest man on the face of the planet, Jeff Bezos, 566,000 people have jobs in an enterprise that 20 years ago had nobody except one guy with a vision thinking about what to do. So
well, you lay out the debate, the public debate that will be had here. But Bernie Sanders is crushing it, Carl. He's an avowed socialist, right? Look what he did in 24 hours. He raised about $6 million, and that dwarfs Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and Amy Klobuchar. Quick comment on that. He is a funding force, Carl.
Well, he raised $230 million for his 20 2016 challenge to Hillary Clinton and never attended a single fundraiser. He has one of the most amazing and extraordinary fundraising donor lists in American history. In fact, Act Blue, this fundraising machine that helped so many Democrats last time around, is built upon two pillars: the Howard Dean donor list from 2004 and the Bernie Sanders donor list from 2016. He's going to have a financial advantage in the 2020 presidential primaries on the Democratic side.
You're right.
Yes,
and they've been waiting for him to come back around for a couple of years, too. Quickly, I want to squeeze this in. Andrew McCabe has done a significant tour this week. The president talked about him yesterday at the White House. Watch here.
I think Andrew McCabe has made a fool out of himself over the last couple of days, and he really looks to me like sort of a poor man's J. Edgar Hoover. I think he's a disaster. And what he was trying to do was terrible, and he was caught.
So you've seen the interviews. What did we learn this week from McCabe?
Well, first of all, we didn't learn some things we should have learned. Scott Pelley blew it, I think, on Sunday night in 60 Minutes. He should have gotten into one of the most critical facts, which is, why was Trump angry with Comey? And it was because Comey was telling him in private, you're not a suspect, but refusing to say that publicly. And that was one of the things that the president was most upset about. So, look, this feeds into the president's narrative that the deep state was trying to get him out. And McCabe added to that this week by talking about the attempt to remove the president on the basis of the 25th Amendment.
Nice to see you, buddy. Carl Rove, they're live in Austin, Texas. Thank you so much for coming in today. In the meantime, Sandra, next Wednesday, there's a public hearing for Michael Cohen. A public hearing on a day where the president is meeting with Chairman Kim in Hanoi talking about nuclear weapons. You wonder whether or not that hearing will go as scheduled or whether or not it's delayed one more time.
Right now it's
Tough thing to do when you're overseas. That's right.
Going to be a big day, going to be a big week next week. Meanwhile, back to one of our top stories of the morning. She joined ISIS and called for the death of America. Now a woman from Alabama says she wants to come home from Syria. What the president has to say about this ISIS bride. We will be speaking to her attorney on this program in a bit.
Also, President Trump gearing up for that summit we just mentioned a moment ago, why he's not letting up on sanctions against the North. We'll talk to General Jack Keane about what we can expect from this one. Next.
And also the lawyers for the Covington Catholic High School students, Nick Salmon, are speaking out, accusing the Washington Post of a modern form of McCarthyism. We'll speak to one of those attorneys. That will be coming up next. There are moved markets. In that room, you can see the Chinese delegation. This is the U.S. delegation on one side, the Chinese delegation on the other. Larry Kudlow, Steve Mnuchin, Robert Lighthizer are there trying to hash out a deal with China. As you can imagine, we will bring you any live news from this as we get it. That is a long-awaited moment.
I haven't taken sanctions off. I'd love to be able to, but in order to do that, we have to do something that's meaningful on the other side. But Chairman Kim and I have a very good relationship. I wouldn't be surprised to see something work out.
We'll see what the expectations games will be for next week. President Trump saying sanctions are still in place on North Korea. They could ramp it up, in fact, if they wanted to. He's confident reaching a nuclear agreement with Chairman Kim. Second summit next week in Vietnam. Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst, retired four-star general. Sir, good morning to you and welcome here. What would you consider a success next week, General?
Yeah, well, clearly we've been stalemated for some time since the last summit. I think a breakthrough from the United States perspective would be that North Korea would give us a timetable to denuclearize with independent inspectors on the scene to observe that denuclearization. That would be a significant breakthrough. I suspect, Bill, we will not get that. What we may get is another dismantling of some kind of nuclear site, maybe one of their major nuclear plants where they develop this technology. And we will not get the clear path to denuclearization that the United States is demanding.
Would that be a disappointment? Clearly, I think it would be. Mike Pompeo is making the rounds this morning. He was on NBC. He was also here with Maria on Fox Business and said this.
You have to remember where we came into this. We came in when missiles were being tested, nuclear weapons were being tested. We haven't had tests of either of those types of systems for well over a year now. No one expects that North Korea will take this action. I think the work that we've done, the economic sanctions that have been in place, the negotiations that President Trump has led, I hope one day we all wake up and we get a moment just like the one that the world had in 1989.
November of 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. If you do not get what you're describing, General, which you don't anticipate, as you just stated, you could ramp up the sanctions. You could open up an office in North Korea. You could open up diplomatic relations to a greater degree. Would that be considered good enough, however, sir?
Well, I think I'm going to take the president. Remember, what he's been saying recently is, I'm in no rush. Now, most people are looking at that as some kind of a concession on his part. I look at it as that I'm going to stick with these sanctions for as long as it takes and continue to squeeze North Korea, that I'm not going to back off on economic sanctions. After all, Bill, that is what brought North Korea to the table. And Secretary Pompeo is right. I mean, clearly they've made progress, and there's been no nuclear testing or ballistic missile testing for 15 months. But that is not the ultimate objective. The ultimate objective is disarm nuclear weapons and disarm ballistic missiles.
Okay. Sir, I want to squeeze in a question here about the Middle East. There's a group known as IP3. What they're trying to do is get the U.S. government to oversee our U.S. contractors to establish nuclear power in the Middle East. Why is that so important from your view, sir?
Well, frankly, the Arab states have legitimate needs for nuclear power, because as they become more industrialized, more and more of their oil is being used for domestic purposes as opposed to export revenue. So that's number one. Number two is IP3, a company that I'm associated with, has concerns because if you're going to build 30 or 40 nuclear power plants, Bill, in the most dangerous and volatile neighborhood in the world, you really have to stitch together a security plan to deal with that, both integrated and comprehensive. And what we're talking about is overhead satellites, drones, sophisticated cyber defense, outside the wire, best-in-class security, and the United States imposed safety and security standards inside the nuclear power plant. The United States is the only country that, if it passes nuclear technology in terms of building power plants for that country, that will insist on a 1, 2, 3 agreement, which means this, that country cannot weaponize that nuclear energy power. And there is no other country that would impose that on a foreign country who wants to build nuclear power. So that is why we want we want the United States in here. We don't want Russia and China running the table on nuclear power in the Middle East.
It's a big topic, one we'll continue to discuss down the road. Thank you, General. Jack Keane there in Washington. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good talking to you, Bill.
Two big stories breaking at this hour. A disturbing discovery at the home of a Coast Guard officer. Prosecutors now calling him a domestic terrorist. Details on that straight ahead.
That'll tell us what the evidence was, what the investigation revealed, why they brought these charges forward. We're also seeing a parallel investigation by federal authorities. If he truly was in charge of sending that white powder letter to himself, that's a serious issue that he's going to have to deal with in possibly the federal courts as well.
We're waiting on police at the top of the hour. They're going to give us an update on this case. The charge that we're looking at in this case, Daniel, can you shed some light on that? Disorderly conduct. It's a Class 4 felony. The lowest felony classification carries the potential sentence of 1 to 3 years in prison. What more can you tell us about that?
Anyone who makes a false report to police can be charged with a crime. Sometimes people make that report because, you know, they were involved in a drug deal and got robbed, and they didn't want to tell the true circumstances of why they were where they were or why they were in the situation they were in. This was a completely made-up event, it seems. That's what the evidence seems to prove. And a total waste of resources by the Chicago Police Department, as well as undermining legitimate victims. You know, I'm afraid this could have a chilling effect on real victims who would maybe not want to come forward for fear that they might not be believed due to, you know, this credibility being taken away from this event. So I think we had 20 homicides in January in Chicago, and certainly the Chicago police could have been spending time trying to find those people responsible and not wasting resources in this investigation. However, to their credit, I think Mr. Smet might have thought that he could make this report and the police wouldn't take it seriously and wouldn't do an investigation. These detectives did exactly what they needed to do. They went and followed the truth, followed the evidence, and found out that this, in fact, seems to be an elaborate hoax.
Smollett's attorneys, two of them, have released a statement saying that they will actively fight these charges. And here's the statement from them saying, like any other citizen, Mr. Smollett enjoys the presumption of innocence, particularly when there has been an investigation like this, one where information, both true and false, has been repeatedly leaked. Given these circumstances, we intend to conduct a thorough investigation and to mount an aggressive defense. What did you think or take away from that statement?
His attorneys are doing what they should be doing. I know Chicago police wanted to have a conversation with him when it looked like he was a suspect in the case. They rightfully so didn't allow that conversation to occur where he could have incriminated himself. The police will have to put together evidence that goes with their version of events. There is going to potentially be a treasure trove. Those letters, there are handwriting experts that can look at that and determine who wrote it. We can analyze the ink. The Postal Service is very good at analyzing products that come into their system, finding video of people dropping them off. All of the physical evidence, if they've got videotape of the brothers purchasing the rope and the bleach, the rope, actually, the ends of the rope can be matched together from where it was taken and cut, and they can put a bunch of physical evidence to prove this case if it's out there. His attorneys should fight that and give him the best defense possible, and he is, as they are true, it's true, he's innocent until proven guilty, but it looks like Chicago police have got probable cause and enough that they've convinced the prosecutor to bring a criminal charge against him, and he will be arraigned on that soon. You mentioned the immense amount of resources and money and staff that poured into this investigation, almost a months-long investigation. Could he be charged restitution to the state? I mean, you're looking at potentially tens of thousands of dollars in resources that were thrown at this investigation. I would encourage the superintendent and his legal team to do just that, to make a request that any disposition in this case involves repaying the citizens of Chicago for resources that might have been wasted. That's if he is determined to be guilty. But I certainly would like to see the judge, if they find that he did this, hold him accountable both criminally and civilly. Got it. And as we know, he conducted interviews during the course of that investigation. He made very emotional statements. Final thought here, Daniel, could those be used against him in this? Absolutely. Anything he said in public can be used against him. Okay. You know, if it was a statement that he gave to police freely and voluntarily, that can be used against him. Got it. So we've got to wait and see. All right. We got to wait and see. Top of the hour, we will get an update. Daniel Linsky, thank you.
In the meantime, there's a new billboard just off Times Square slamming Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Here it is. She's taken a lot of heat for cheering the decision of Amazon not to build a headquarters here in New York. And stand trial, saying she is not an American citizen. She is a terrorist. The 24-year-old Alabama woman went to Syria 4 years ago, marrying 3 ISIS fighters and calling for death to Americans on Twitter. Let's bring in Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Dr. Jasser, I appreciate your time this morning. So let's start first with how she got here.
Well, it's amazing how her attorney, who works for the Council on American Islamic Relations, wastes no opportunity to turn every Muslim, no matter how radical, into a victim. She's not a victim. She was not only radicalized by the movement, but burned her passports, proudly declared war on America, and then joined ISIS, reportedly participated in numbers of war crimes, including slavery of other women, rape of other women and other brides, saw beheadings and tortures and other crimes committed while she was in Syria. So now all of a sudden she's giving interviews to ABC saying, oh, I want to pay back my debt to society through therapy, that somehow this is just something she can shed off. She became not only a terrorist, she became an enemy of our country. And if she did believe in the citizenship oath, which likely wasn't valid because she's the daughter of a diplomat, but if she did believe in that, she abandoned it and actually violated it and became an enemy combatant.
Let's deal with what we know at this point and what her legal team has actually released. And again, we'll be talking to them coming up. But here's the birth certificate. This was provided by her attorney. They put it out there on Twitter for everybody to see, making the case that she's an American citizen born in Hackensack, New Jersey in the early 90s. So they provide that, and also a letter showing that her father was not actually a diplomat when she was born, which would make her birthright citizenship legal in the case here, which means that it makes the case for them asking for due process back here in the United States. Your thoughts on all of that?
I'm trying to understand how they're helping her, because there's 2 paths here. the bottom line, I think Secretary Pompeo and President Trump are doing her a service by not letting her back in, because she was the daughter of a diplomat, whether it was a few months in which he stopped being so or not. She was, and diplomatic children do not become citizens. That's not part of birthright citizenship. Now, if she is allowed in, the other path she could have is to come in and get due process of law as a citizen, which I hope would include imprisonment and then a trial for treason and committing acts of war against her own country. That does not include any freedom that I would ever hope for in the next decades, let alone in the next few years, which she hopes she's going to pay back by therapy. So I have no idea what the approach is, other than, again, to make every most radical Muslim into a victim, which actually is helping radicalize Muslims. Right, and I hope every Muslim knows. Yes.
On that point, and I want to take you up on that, and you got cut off a little bit. They're making the case that he was not a diplomat, by the way, at the time of her birth. And that's what we're going to hear more about. But let me just read you this from her lawyer, who's going to appear on this program in a short while. The government needs to engage with her, but not just her, all of these people who joined ISIS from the West. That is her direct words. And I want to throw this up on the screen here. We had our brain room look up some of the recent statistics on this sort of movement with American ISIS fighters, and here's what we found. The George Washington University put this out. Estimated 300 Americans attempted to join ISIS and other radical Islamic groups. 64 American jihadist travelers to Iraq and Syria from the dates 2011 to 2018. Dr. Jasser, 12 of those Americans have returned home. What should we make of that?
It's amazing to me. I mean, he's saying the government needs to engage with them. No. We need to reject Islamists. We need to reject jihadists and people who trample on our Constitution, trample on our citizenship oath. So, no, there are millions of American Muslims and people who want to come back that are true humanitarian victims of the Syrian conflict. And by the way, her attorney is from the same town in Aleppo that my family's from, that is suffering from a revolution and radicalization of not only ISIS, but the Syrian government and other radicals that her attorney, by the way, apologized for Hamas, Hezbollah, and other groups. So it's always America's fault, and yet they don't have the strength of character to stand against terrorists like this and say, you know what, there are millions of other humanitarian cases that we should take up and pay attention to, and ignore the militants that should actually, if the message is going to be one of American strength, they should get the message that jihadists have no space here and they need to be rejected legally with the full brunt of our law.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, we appreciate you coming on. We're going to learn a whole lot more here shortly. Thank you. We're going to get the family side of all this. Our headliner this morning will be her attorney, Hassan Shibli. He will join us at 10:30, just a short time from now.
Looking forward to talking to him. In the meantime, did you see this last night? Duke, Carolina. Unbelievable moment. Duke Zion Williamson. Watch him 36 seconds into the game. Maybe the best player in the country. Watch his left foot. It comes out of his shoe. Split his sneaker like a banana. It was a Nike, size 15. He left the game, did not come back. We're told he's got a mild knee sprain in his right knee, so it's the opposite leg. North Carolina played a great game. They won at 88-72. Awesome rivalry. Fantastic player right there. Hope for the best on that.
Well, I'm awake now. Man, did you go to sleep last night? Because that went pretty late.
He is so 6'7", 245, 18 years old. Really a star player.
All right, what a game.
Best to him. Yeah.
Now to this, a former top attorney at the FBI saying it dropped the ball on the Clinton email investigation. Why he claims the former Secretary of State should have been prosecuted. Trey Gowdy will join.
Good morning to you. I saw a comment that said it's not about the money, although it's a lot of money, $250 million. It's about the message. What is the message here, Todd?
Well, the message is very important, Don, and that is that we cannot tolerate a media establishment that goes after minors, 16-year-old boys, and completely destroys their reputation and then says that's okay and moves on to the next story. It's totally unacceptable.
Okay, now, the Post has vast financial resources. And I mentioned the sum you're looking for, right? $50 million compensatory, $200 million punitive. Is it about the money and not the message?
Well, the money is certainly the message, and so those are intertwined very carefully. And in this circumstance, we have a new type of damages, and those are perpetual reputational damages. Other commentators have sought to say that our damages are too high, but when you think about that those damages never go away and live on the internet forever, I think they're appropriate in this circumstance.
Here's what the Washington Post says. Statement, we're reviewing a copy of the lawsuit. It's only one line, and we plan to mount a vigorous defense. Don't you have to prove malice? And if so, how do you do that, Todd?
Bill, I do not think we have to prove malice, but even if we had to, we would be able to do that. First, Nick Sandmann is a private individual, so we only have to prove negligence. However, if a ruling were to be different and they were to consider him an involuntary public figure and we had to prove malice, we would be able to do that because the Washington Post is a weaponized news outlet that used its power and strength to destroy Nick Sandmann's reputation, and they did that without adequate and appropriate levels of journalistic integrity and reporting, and that in itself is malicious. Okay. So I feel comfortable with either standard.
A couple more quick questions. I want to play a little bit of what we were picking up back in the day, as I'm sure you're quite familiar. Kentucky law says the paper is allowed to retract and issue an apology, retract a story within 10 days. If that is the case, does that make your lawsuit moot?
Well, I don't think that the Washington Post can ever adequately retract because of this concept of perpetual reputational damages. They can try, and they do have 10 days to do that. But ultimately, the jury will decide whether the retraction is adequate. So they have a mountain of retraction to try to put forth
so it's a degree
to do it
or it's
effectively.
A measure of the retraction. That's what I'm hearing from you. Is that right?
That's right. If you destroy somebody's reputation on the front page, you can't go to the B section and put it on the back page and say we're sorry.
Okay, so the Archdiocese apologized. Does that make do you drop the case against them or not?
No. I mean, the Diocese of Covington squeezed a half apology midway into a paragraph. That apology is not at all related or similar in size to the damage that their statement did. The Diocese of Covington statement was used nationally and internationally as a truthful statement, and the person who repeats that statement and the person who makes the statement are both liable. So the Diocese of Covington put that statement out there and did a lot of damage to Nick's reputation, and that retraction is inadequate.
I apologize for interrupting you.
Yes.
They are still on the list then, correct?
That's okay. Absolutely.
Okay. There is a list, I think, of 51 different media entities and individuals. There's just a sample of what was going down in mid-January around this case. Watch here.
They're all jeering and they're dancing. He's got this smug look on his face. And let's not lie, everyone that sees that smug look wants to punch that kid.
That young man there does not look like someone who is appreciative and considerate of this culture and this chant going on.
I blame that kid. What a little...
Okay, none of it is great in reflection here. Is Trevor Noah on your list? Is CNN on your list? Is Bill Maher on your list, sir?
Well, certainly CNN and Bill Maher did things that we consider to have crossed the line. We think that the statements they made are defamatory. They're not humorous. And so certainly Bill Maher is somebody that we're looking at very carefully, and HBO for allowing him to make those defamatory statements.
Okay, but
CNN also...
not Trevor Noah, correct? I want to be clear on this.
I am honestly not familiar enough with what Trevor Noah said. The one who said, punch that kid? No, that person is most definitely on the list.
Okay, so who is next then? If the Washington Post was lined up first, sir, who do you go after next?
We have not decided whom we will sue next. However, we're discussing that, and these lawsuits will continue to roll out over the next 30 to 60 days.
Todd McMurtry, thank you, sir, for your time out of Cincinnati, Ohio, just across the river there from Covington, Kentucky. And the house that he turned himself in earlier, due in court today at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 local, charged with making false statements to police. So more details expected in this news conference. That will begin any moment now live in Chicago. Complete coverage this hour now. Daniel Linsky, former Boston superintendent in charge of police. Judge Anna Napolitano here in New York. And Matt Finn begins our coverage this hour live in Chicago. Matt, let's start with you outside police headquarters there. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. Police tell us that Jussie Smollett arranged to turn himself in at 5 o'clock local this morning with the presence of his attorneys away from cameras. We're told it happened without incident, and we expect to see Jussie Smollett's mugshot for the first time during this press conference set to begin at any moment. Police tell us that right now Jussie Smollett is represented by at least 3 attorneys, including high-profile criminal defense attorney Mark Garagos. Police say throughout the beginning of their investigation, Smollett initially cooperated, but then these 2 brothers gave some type of testimony that dramatically altered the course of their investigation. Last Saturday, the police superintendent submitted a request for a follow-up interview with Jussie Smollett. Our understanding is that he never responded to that follow-up interview request, so police took their case to a grand jury here in Chicago where they got the charge approved and the ability to arrest Jussie Smollett. He turned himself in this morning, and in any moment we expect to hear from Chicago's police superintendent. We expect to get more details about their investigation and Jussie Smollett's arrest. Bill.
Matt Finn will be back with you in a moment there in Chicago. Thank you, sir.
Thank you to Matt. For more on all this, let's bring in Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst. Good morning to you, Judge.
Good morning.
What strikes you this morning as we learned he turned himself in, and now we are about to get an update from the police?
A couple of observations. I'm wondering if he really did this, and the evidence points that way, what he told his lawyers, because his lawyers put on the public face of he didn't do it, and the truth is going to come out. If he had been truthful to his lawyers, they had an opportunity to negotiate a deal for him, in my view, a small window of time about 6 or 7 days ago, during which they could have negotiated, I think, some sort of a guilty plea without incarceration. But now it's gone too far. His persistence in lies, it appears, restated by the lawyers, digging their heels in, causing the Chicago police, you'll probably hear soon how much money they spent on this, spent a fortune in person power and in resources, have closed the window during which he can make a deal. The other interesting issue is there's another prosecution here that may happen. The federal government. If he mailed that threatening letter to himself by using the post office, he engaged in postal fraud. That's 5 to 10 years in jail. That's 3 times what he's facing for filing a false report with the Chicago
That's the more serious matter here to be addressed.
Yes, if the feds want to go there.
So we'll hear from police in a moment. What happens this afternoon?
Well, this afternoon, I think he will plead not guilty and be released either on his own recognizance or with a very small bail. I don't think he's a threat to society. As far as I know, he doesn't have any prior record. They may ask him to surrender his passport just to be sure that he can't leave the country.
So this afternoon is a plea, and it is posting bond.
Correct. If there is bond, I mean, it could be a simple signature, a simple promise to return. Since it's a public person, it's hard for him to go anywhere without anybody knowing.
We do know that he did speak to police several times leading up to this. Most recently, his invites, he didn't show. We know that. But he did speak to police. He also spoke in several interviews. He maintained his story throughout. Can those words be used against him?
Yes, Sandra. This is a very, very important question you have just asked. Each time he lied is a separate and distinct offense if the prosecutors want to frame it that way. Filing the false report is an offense. Lying to them to back it up, first time he met with them, is a second offense. Lying to them to back it up the second time he met with them. So sometimes they merge those into one charge, but if they really want to get aggressive with him, they will file and get the grand jury to approve several charges against him, which expands his exposure in jail and gives the police more negotiating latitude with his lawyers.
I'm going to get to Daniel Linsky in a moment here, but just characterize this for us, Judge. When you think about the national attention a story like this brought to the case, when you think about the charge of racism that involved all the politics that was thrown into it, does the judge weigh those factors? Given the amount of national
I hope not. It sickened me that the president was drawn into this, that the MAGA stuff was drawn into it, that a lot of people said, look, we're a racist society. This is an example of it, people who jumped the gun.
You said you hope not. I'm asking, does the judge have to consider some of this in the case now?
Under the law, the judge sentences the defendant and the crime and not the events around him. So I don't think the judge will take that into consideration.
Okay. You think about the amount of crime that the city of Chicago faces and the amount of resources that were taken away and poured into this investigation for a month, Judge.
I mean, that's the harm that he caused to the government, and that's a very legitimate argument for them pursuing him aggressively.
Daniel Linsky with us from Boston. Daniel, we spoke last hour, former Boston Superintendent-in-Chief of Police, Incident Commander, Boston Marathon Bomber, Managing Director of Kroll. And Daniel, what do you expect from police here in a moment when they begin taking questions in all likelihood?
I think we're going to see them lay out the case and the evidence they have. They made the unique step of presenting it to a grand jury, which means that they're confident that evidence has been explained to people outside the law enforcement practice, and they've determined that it's enough to bring a charge. The citizens who sit in the grand jury, I think they will lay out the evidence, and we'll probably see the defense continue on where they're going to try and attack the credibility of the witnesses who've come forward and given statements contrary to Mr. Smollett's statement. I think that's probably the defense they can mount. Depending on how much evidence they have, they may change that strategy later on and not go to trial. But I believe if they go to trial, they'll try and undermine the credibility of any evidence that was brought forward against him.
Daniel, there's been a lot of activity in this case in recent days leading up to it, including some pretty lengthy police interviews we heard about involving the brothers, a search of the home, and their release after officers had cleared them. So we know that at this point, there's the brothers' words that could be used against him. There's any evidence that they found in the house that this was premeditated on his part. So how will all of that be used?
Yeah, all of that evidence we brought in. If the brothers made incriminating statements that they were involved in this, and they didn't falsely report it, they participated in, the allegations are that they participated in putting on this mock theater to make it look like this was an actual attack. That in and of itself might not be criminal. Once they allowed it to, knowing that it became a false police report, if they had lied to authorities and continued it, that's where they had some more additional criminal exposure. So all of that evidence, if they've implicated themselves, the search warrant's going to stand. And if there's physical evidence that relates to this attack, that can relate communications and planning, preparation, forensic evidence that ties Smollett to this, all of that will be entered into the trial process efficiently and effectively.
We're told a few more minutes here before police get underway as we wait on that, Judge. There was a report over the weekend, Fox 32 in Chicago, doing some great reporting. All the locals have been the leader on the story from the very beginning. They reported that there was a receipt from Ace Hardware that shows where you bought the rope to make the noose. So that could be entered in this case. I think the other critical factor is the phone, because it has been reported that he was reluctant to turn his phone over because he had contacts on there they did not want to share, etc. I would imagine in a scenario that he has reached at this point, the phone is a big part of the police.
I would think so. And if the phone is tampered with or gone, now you have another charge. But the police ought to have gotten a search warrant for that phone by now, especially since he's in custody.
Okay.
I want to throw up if we have it, or otherwise I'll just read it, the statement that his legal team put out. Here's where they stand heading to this morning. Like any other citizen, Mr. Smollett enjoys the presumption of innocence, particularly when there has been an investigation like this one, where information, both true and false, has been repeatedly leaked. Given these circumstances, we intend to conduct a thorough investigation and to mount an aggressive defense. Judge, how can you...
It's hard to believe what the defense would be. I mean, the defense can't be, I didn't do it, it was somebody else. The defense could be temporary insanity, some sort of a mental block that he didn't know right from wrong, a very difficult defense to mount. But I will tell you this, by hiring Mark Garagos, we all know Mark Garagos, this is one of the most successful, tenacious, on his feet, criminal and expensive criminal defense lawyers in the country. You usually don't hire him to work out a settlement. You hire him to persuade a jury that you didn't do anything criminal. So we're going to wait and see on that one.
Okay, Daniel Linsky, as you watch from Boston now, what do you think is important here in a moment with regard to evidence and the developments that we have watched now from overnight and into the morning?
I think it'll be important for the superintendent to lay out the evidence just so that people get a sense of exactly what happened here. I also think it's important for the superintendent to communicate to victims who might be reluctant to come forward, people who might not be sharing their sexuality with their family members and are victims of assaults like this, who might not want to come forward and make reports, that we encourage legitimate victims to still continue to report to law enforcement so that we can hold people accountable when these things are real. The real big challenge here is the undermining that this event did to legitimate victims in our country.
Very important point to make there. As we await this news conference, should be starting any moment now. Here is the official mugshot. On your screen there, the police department in Chicago have just released that. Jussie Smollett, his mugshot, he surrendered around the 6:30 a.m. Eastern time this morning, Chicago time 5:30 this morning. There it is, Judge. And as we await this news conference, the charge of disorderly conduct, Class 4 felony, lowest felony classification. What more can you tell us about what he's facing here?
Well, I don't know if he has any prior convictions. I'm going to guess he doesn't, because if he did, I think we would know about it by now. Our colleagues in the press would have revealed that. So a first-time offender facing a low-level, what is called in Illinois Class 4 felony, the terminology is different in different states, ordinarily would not be a candidate for incarceration.
All right, we just got a heads up that the police have entered the room. There you see them. Chicago, Illinois. The Chicago Police Department will start their news conference here any moment now on Jussie Smollett. He surrendered at 6:30 a.m. Eastern time this morning. We now await an update from the police.
There was some reporting.
Good morning, everyone.
He does have a criminal record.
Before I get started,
so we'll go into that next here.
On why we're here. You know, as I look out into the crowd, I just wish that the families of gun violence in this city got this much attention, because that's who really deserves the amount of attention that we're giving to this particular incident. So this morning, I come to you not only as the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, but also as a black man who spent his entire life living in the city of Chicago. I know the racial divide that exists here. I know how hard it's been for our city and our nation to come together. And I also know the disparities, and I know the history. This announcement today recognizes that Empire actor Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career. I'm left hanging my head and asking why. Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile? How can an individual who's been embraced by the city of Chicago turn around and slap everyone in this city in the face by making these false claims? Bogus police reports cause real harm. They do harm to every legitimate victim who's in need of support by police and investigators, as well as the citizens of this city. Chicago hosts one of the largest pride parades in the world, and we're proud of that as a police department and also as a city. We do not, nor will we ever tolerate hate in our city, whether that hate is based on an individual's sexual orientation, race, or anything else. So I'm offended by what's happened, and I'm also angry. I love the city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, warts and all. But this publicity stunt was a scar that Chicago didn't earn and certainly didn't deserve. To make things worse, the accusations within this phony attack received national attention for weeks. Celebrities, news commentators, and even presidential candidates weighed in on something that was choreographed by an actor. First, Smollett attempted to gain attention by sending a false letter that relied on racial, homophobic, and political language. When that didn't work, Smollett paid $3,500 to stage this attack and drag Chicago's reputation through the mud in the process. And why? This stunt was orchestrated by Smollett because he was dissatisfied with his salary. So he concocted a story about being attacked. Now, our city has problems. We know that. We have problems that have affected people from all walks of life, and we know that. but to put the national spotlight on Chicago for something that is both egregious and untrue is simply shameful. I'm also concerned about what this means moving forward for hate crimes. Now, of course, the Chicago Police Department will continue to investigate all reports of these types of incidents with the same amount of vigor that we did with this one. But my concern is that hate crimes will now publicly be met with a level of skepticism that previously didn't happen. That said, Smollett was treated as a victim throughout this investigation until we received evidence that led detectives in another direction. I couldn't be more proud of the unrelenting detective work that went into this investigation, and I couldn't be more proud of every investigator that played a part in it. The detective work that we saw in this case is indicative of the work that our detectives do every day in this city. This case in particular involved hours of video evidence, which when combined with old-fashioned police work, uncovered the truth. These detectives deserve all the credit in the world for carefully analyzing the leads and the evidence for weeks before coming to their conclusion. I'd also like to thank the FBI for their help in this investigation. The FBI's partnership with CPD has been pivotal in this particular case. I only hope that the truth about what happened receives the same amount of attention that the hoax did. I'll continue to pray for this troubled young man who resorted to both drastic and illegal tactics to gain attention. I'll also continue to pray for our city, asking that we can move forward from this and begin to heal. And now I'd like to call up Commander Edward Wadnicki, who personally led this patient and deliberate investigation, to walk everyone through how the Chicago Police Department arrived at this point.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Edward Wadnicki. I'm the commander of the Area Central Detective Division. I'm here to answer questions. Okay. The boss just corrected me. Please forgive me. I'm supposed to go through the timeline of our investigation. It's okay. So here's where we are. As you all know, on the early morning of February 29th at 2 o'clock in the morning, Jesse Smollett reported that he was the victim of a hate crime. Detectives responded to the incident and interviewed him eventually at Northwestern Hospital, where he reported to us that the two offenders yelled racial and homophobic and political statements at him and beat him, put a noose around his neck, and threw bleach on him, and then fled from the area. We learned at the time that Jesse was not hurt, other than scratches on his face, maybe some bruising, but no broken ribs or serious injuries. So we started a full-scale investigation into this hate crime, a very serious crime anywhere. We quickly found two persons of interest on video that we believed were the likely offenders in this case. We initially put out a seeking to identify, and we got this out in a community alert. We then started searching the area for video cameras and witnesses that could help us with our investigation. During that time frame, we interviewed over 100 individuals in a canvass of the area and a follow-up canvass as our investigation expanded. We located approximately 35 of our Chicago Police pod cameras in the area and in the areas that we determined these two persons of interest fled. We additionally found over 20 private sector cameras, and I got to say that was super useful in this investigation. The city came together to investigate and help the police with this crime. It was because of these pod cameras, our investment into technology in the city of Chicago and the great assistance from the community in giving us those other cameras that led us to a really solid timeline of where our two persons of interest went. So in short, we were able to track them initially forward. So after the crime, we were able to see that they fled in a particular direction and eventually got into a cab. Our investigators located that cab, interviewed the cab driver, got some video out of that cab, followed that cab using all of these surveillance cameras that are located throughout the city, the pod cameras, to an area up on the north side where they abruptly stopped the cab, got out, and walked on foot. Again, the community came together to provide us with security footage from their private cameras. So at that point, we then started tracking these two persons of interest backwards to where they came from. So we followed them walking around and eventually back to where they had gotten out of a cab. So that was another individual that we had to interview and another individual where we sought video. We continued to track that cab back to the point where the cab was tracked down by our two persons of interest in a rideshare car. We then followed up on the rideshare, and that was the lead that we needed in order to identify the two persons of interest. At that point, we had a real good timeline of where these two people went. We were able to put a name to both of these individuals, and it was at that time that we started looking at where they went right after this event. We tracked them to going to O'Hare Airport and jumping on a flight to Nigeria. Our investigation led us to determine that they had purchased a round-trip ticket with them returning to Chicago on the 13th, so approximately 2 weeks after the incident. So that gave us a couple of weeks to try to continue to follow up on any investigative lead, any investigative lead that would help us try to determine what happened in this incident. So while we were waiting for them to return, we executed over 50 search warrants and subpoenas, working with our partners in the state's attorney's office, phone records, social media records, and records on individuals to help us illuminate the likely facts that occurred in this event. So moving forward to the 13th, we had a team in place working with the FBI, Customs, and our partners out at the airport. Airport police helped us tremendously, and we were able to locate and identify these two individuals, these two persons of interest, when they entered back into the country at Customs. We took them into custody. We read them their rights, and they both initially asked for an attorney. They were brought to Area Central Detective Headquarters so that we could process them, and it was at that time that their attorney showed up. I think you've all seen her on the news the last couple of days. She came to us, and after speaking with these two people of interest, she said that something smelled fishy. She did not think that they were the offenders as were reported. She worked with us very, very closely to get to the point where she came to me and said, "You really need to talk to these guys. I'm going to allow them to give you a video interview with us present, and we're going to have you hear their story. They are not offenders, they're victims." It was at that time that this investigation started to spin in a completely new direction. You've heard some of the statements that their lawyer, Ms. Schmidt, has made, and it was at that time that we took the information that these two individuals provided to us and we substantiated the timeline and the details that they gave to us in this interview. We were able to substantiate those things. We worked very, very closely with the State's Attorney's Office. We had been working very, very closely with the State's Attorney's Office for over a week at that point, and it was then on the 15th, Friday the 15th, after approximately 47 hours of them being in custody and hours of them meeting with us and telling us their story and documenting their story, did we release them without charging, and I classified them no longer as suspects or persons of interest and as witnesses. So as is typical with any investigation, one would typically lock these witnesses into a grand jury statement. Monday was a holiday, the 18th. Tuesday was the first day that we could attempt to do that. So we scheduled a appointment with the grand jury, working again very closely with the State's Attorney's Office in this. And as you know, at the last minute, Jesse's lawyers called and said that they had evidence to postpone the grand jury that they wanted to provide to us. It was at that time that they called us, and I met with them, with a team of our detectives, and essentially they gave us no new information. So I reported that back to the State's Attorney's Office, and it was at that time that we locked in both of these witnesses to the grand jury. I'm told they did an excellent job, and then the State's Attorney's Office approved charges against Jesse for the Class 4 disorderly conduct false police report. We met with Jesse's attorneys, and we arranged for him to turn himself in, and as you all know, he turned himself in at 5 o'clock this morning in the 1st District in Chicago. Today at 1:30, Jesse will be going in front of a bond court judge, and the bond court hearing will be conducted at 26 in California.
Say again?
Turned himself in this morning.
Well, it was uneventful. He showed up, of course, with his attorneys and a few other individuals, but it went smoothly.
Superintendent Johnson, if you had enough evidence to just charge him, why take it to a grand jury?
Because that's typically what we do. Once we believe that witnesses are valuable witnesses and credible, then we take them to the grand jury to lock their testimonies in.
Superintendent Johnson, can you go into the motive a little more? I think I'm also hearing for the first time. You said that he sent that false letter to himself, and you also said that he was dissatisfied with his salary. Did you get that information from the two brothers?
Yes.
Who were the subpoenas and search warrants issued against?
Well, a number of individuals. You know, we serve subpoenas and warrants, of course, on Mr. Smollett, his manager for phone records, the two people of interest that we had. And so we still have quite a few search warrants and subpoenas out there that we're waiting.
Superintendent, you talked about the detectives and the amount of resources that went into this case. Can you quantify how many man hours went into this, how many detectives worked this case, and also can you confirm that detectives working the case from the February 7th shooting that 1-year-old pulled from that case?
We didn't pull resources from any shootings or homicide investigations. The detectives that you see behind me basically work on different teams, which include property crimes and things of that nature. We don't have exact numbers yet, but let me just tell you all this. Anytime a hate crime is reported in the city of Chicago, it gets the same attention. This didn't get any special attention. You all gave this more attention specifically than we do. We give every hate crime in this city the same amount of vigor because there's no place for hatred in the city. And as I said in the very beginning, you know, I've lived in the city of Chicago my entire life. We just don't have any room for hatred in this city. and for somebody to use it for personal gain, it's shameful, because what that does is take away the resources that we could be putting into other crimes.
Do you think the brothers should be implicated vis-a-vis the letter?
Say again?
Would the brothers be implicated for sending the letter in any sense? If the feds decide to look into that, would you have anything to say to the feds about the cooperation and whether or not you want to pursue charges?
That's the FBI's investigation, so CPD doesn't comment on it.
The president, Gloria Schmidt, told the media after the grand jury was finished that the current narrative that's out there about how much Jesse allegedly paid the brothers was incorrect. Can the police speak to what evidence they may have that, you know, Jesse orchestrated this attack, asked the brothers to carry out this attack, and was there any evidence of money payments to the brothers?
Yeah, we have evidence. We have the check that he used to pay them. So the $3,500 was for the two of them in total, and then $500 upon return.
So was there like an quote an attack on the street, or did it take place somewhere else? How did that work?
No, it took place right there. So of course it was staged. The brothers had on gloves during the staged attack, where they punched him a little bit. But as far as we can tell, the scratches and bruising that you saw on his face was most likely self-inflicted.
So when you learned about the motive of this, how did you react when you learned about the motive of this? How did that teach you and all the detectives when you finally figured out what the motive was?
So let me reiterate again. You know, you all heard me say consistently that we were treating Mr. Smollett like a victim, and we did. We might have had some peculiarities with the case, as we do with most cases. So it wasn't until the 47th hour of their 48-hour hold time that we could legally hold him in custody that it took a change. So we gave him the benefit of the doubt up until that 47th hour. But when we discovered the actual motive, quite frankly, it pissed everybody off, you know, because we have to invest valuable resources. A lot of what I want you all to really understand is when you all put things out there into the universe that's not actual facts, then it causes us to have to chase all that stuff down. Those are resources and time spent that we'll never get back, that we could utilize for another investigation. And let me be clear about something. The shootings and homicides in this city were not impacted at all by this particular investigation. And again, we give the same amount of resources to every hate crime that's reported in this city.
Was the attack purposely done out of camera? Did they know where the cameras were?
I think that they knew where that one camera was, but unfortunately it didn't capture the event. So I believe that Mr. Smollett wanted it on camera, but unfortunately that particular camera wasn't pointed in that direction.
You said that search warrants were executed on Mr. Smollett's manager. Is the Chicago Police Department looking at Mr. Smollett's manager?
No, not at this time.
Mr. Smollett said that he was on the phone with his manager at the time. Was the manager, Greg Moore, involved with this? Did he know it was a ruse?
He was on the phone, but whether or not he knew it was a ruse, we can't speak to right now.
Are you interviewing him?
At some point, we'll talk to him.
At one point, when this case started getting pretty thick, people started pointing things like the police department. How did you take that when you saw people starting talking negatively about the issues that were going on in the city?
It was upsetting, you know, and I want you all to realize this. So we've been working on this investigation for about 3 weeks. We've solved several shootings and homicides in that period of time. So we don't take away resources from violent crimes of that nature just because this person is a celebrity. Again, you all gave this a lot more attention than it probably deserves. So when you get the opportunity, the shooting victims and families in this city that are victims of those crimes, give them the same amount of attention. This shouldn't have garnered the attention that it did, but it did because of his celebrity status.
From the outside looking in, allegedly practiced the hate crime before it actually happened. So if that was the case, why are they not being charged, or in that situation, should they be charged? How are you guys figuring that out?
So Mr. Smollett is the one that orchestrated this crime. They became cooperating witnesses in the 47th hour of their 48-hour hold time. So now they are witnesses to what he did. So he has to be accountable for what he did. He orchestrated this.
Does being accountable mean he should have to pay all the money back that was invested in this massive investigation?
Well, I think that's a subject for another day. But of course, it's because of what he did that we had to invest all these resources.
Superintendent, did Mr. Smollett make any statements while in custody? Is he still maintaining his innocence?
He hasn't made any statements at this time.
Do you have text messages?
No.
Do you have text messages between?
Fox's decision to recuse herself of that speed in solving this case and bringing charges?
No, Kim Fox and I, look, I'm the police superintendent. She's Cook County State's attorney. So we talk almost every day about different cases. So the fact that she recused herself didn't impact the case at all.
Did she drag her feet in any way?
Say again?
Did she drag her feet on this in any way?
Listen, we have a great relationship with our federal partners, and we certainly need to have a good relationship with our state's attorney's office, which we did. So again, you all have to remember that the erroneous rumors and innuendo that was put out there in the beginning was just that. This investigation didn't turn in the direction of Mr. Smollett being a defendant until the 47th hour that we had those two individuals in custody. So one more hour, we would have had to let them go. We may not be here today. So the state's attorney didn't drag anything. We needed to put the case together. These things take time. This isn't TV. Okay? This is real life. So it takes time.
Do you text?
Guys, Superintendent, there were a lot of leaks in this case. Was that intentional at all?
Well, who's to say the leaks came from us? Just because there are leaks out there doesn't necessarily mean it came from CPD. I heard particular things that were out there that I knew was simply untrue. So it doesn't mean it came from the police department.
Do you have text messages or other exchanges between the brothers and Jesse?
We have the phone records that clearly indicate that they talked to each other quite a bit before the incident, after the incident, and while they were out of the country.
Jussie and the brothers, you mean, the phone record?
Yes.
That's what you're referring to.
Yes.
Superintendent, do you know that Smollett tried to make contact or made contact with his brothers after the attack?
You mean right after, like moments afterwards?
After the attack, or attempted to make contact in the weeks following the attack?
Yeah, I just said. So we know that they talked at least an hour or so before the attack, an hour or so after the attack, and then while they were out of the country. We know that they were talking.
Justin tried to recruit any other people to stage this attack, or were the brothers his first choice?
I don't know if they were his first choice, but that's who ultimately did it, but we don't have any evidence to suggest that.
Why did you choose them?
It was mentioned that the brothers might be victims in this. What did you mean by that?
That the brothers might be victims?
Yeah, were they coerced somehow or manipulated, or how would you describe them? I think that's what the commander said.
Yeah, boss, I think that I think the fact that this was staged and that Jesse hired these two guys to stage this for his benefit and then spin this into a criminal investigation put them in a really tough spot as well, to the point where now they were arrested for a hate crime, and only because of just the incredible work by the entire team did we get to the point where we were able to get the truth from them, and now we are where we are today.
Commander, why did Smollett hire those two brothers? I mean, can you describe what their relationship was, like how close they were? Smollett was with those two brothers? Yeah.
So one of the brothers worked on Empire, so they had a relationship, an association. So he probably knew that he needed somebody with some bulk, and he knew them. They had a previous relationship, so that's probably the only reason he chose them.
Sir, did you see Jussie's interview on Good Morning America? Good Morning America. Good Morning America. Yes. Did you see the interview on ABC?
I didn't see the entire thing. I saw a couple of parts of it, and to be quite honest, it's shameful, because it painted this city that we all love and work hard in a negative connotation, to insinuate and to stage a hate crime of that nature when he knew as a celebrity it would get a lot of attention. It's just despicable. It makes you wonder what's going through someone's mind to do something like that. So yeah, I saw a couple of parts of it, and I was angered by it, to be quite honest.
How quickly did you all know
there
that
were
this?
two cabs. They took a ride share to the crime, or on their way to the crime. Then they took a regular yellow cab afterwards.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the ride share, which you have a profile for it and has their identity, would you guys be able to figure out who these guys were?
Well, you know what? That certainly helped, and their account information on that really pinpointed who they were. But who's to say whether or not we would have or not? Let me tell you this. These individuals you see standing behind me, the detectives in Chicago, in my opinion, are probably some of the best detectives in this country. So I have no doubt that they would have gotten to the bottom of this. You know, is that? Okay. Yeah, that's last call before closing.
How quickly after this crime was reported did you all figure out or think that something doesn't add up?
Well, to be perfectly honest, from the very beginning we had some questions about it. But as I said, we gave Mr. Smollett the benefit of the doubt all the way up until that 47th hour of the 48 hours we could hold those two individuals, because we just didn't have the total package to support that it was a hoax. So when you heard me coming out saying we are treating him like a victim, that was the truth, because at that time, that's what he was. And I think anybody that reports a crime deserves the Chicago Police Department to treat them in that fashion until we have solid evidence to prove otherwise. So way in the back.
The brothers were obviously incentivized by the check, but did they indicate anything else that made them do this, why they agreed to do it, and what they thought the outcome would be?
Well, you know what? They did it because of the financial aspect of it. Now, whether or not they knew the whole thing would go the way that it did, and I can tell you all with 100% certainty, the way that they carried this out, there was never a thought in their mind that we would be able to track them down, because these detectives, they put in intense work and just great work, and I cannot say how incredibly proud I am of them for the work that they put into it. But that's just an example of the work that they do every day that just goes unreported because it doesn't get the media attention that this particular case got. But it was financial, guys.
Did the Good Morning America play any role in the investigation in that Jesse essentially identified who these brothers were?
Well, he identified who those two individuals were. You know, we knew that then. He didn't know that we knew. But, yeah, he helped us out when he identified them. Okay?
Did you identify the brothers specifically with all of the video surveillance? When was it in the investigation when you realized their names and who they were? Was it when you tracked?
That was after the
ride-share
account, yes.
So what day was that? Where was that in the investigation?
Remember that?
Probably about a week later. Superintendent, the one piece of evidence then just confirming that he wanted was not found on camera, the roughhousing, the minor stage beating. It's not on camera anymore.
That was the one piece. We have about, I would say about 2 hours of footage back and forth, and those few minutes were not on.
Was it bleach they poured on him?
Say again?
Was it bleach they poured on him?
We don't know. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all.
Can you go into more detail about the 47th hour?
Say again?
Can you go into a little bit more detail about what it was in the 47th hour that...
Well, that's at the 47th hours when the two brothers decided, like the commander reiterated, that with the help of their lawyer, they decided to confess to the entirety of what the plot was.
Superintendent, you said you want Smollett to be held accountable. You said you want Smollett to be held accountable. I'm curious, what is justice in your eyes?
Absolute justice would be an apology to this city that he smeared, admitting what he did, and then be man enough to offer what he should offer up in terms of all the resources that were put into this. Thank you.
Superintendent, is there racism or discrimination within?
That's an amazing press conference. Eddie Johnson there, Superintendent-in-Chief Police there with Chicago, Illinois, a man who cares deeply about his community and considers himself highly offended by the events that we've watched.